The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. This is Monica Main, and thank you for joining me this early. So let me just explain why I had to do it earlier today. I actually have been going through an ongoing dentist thing when it comes to fixing my front teeth. So if you're not familiar, I actually have a really good smile most of the time. And so there's a reason for that. And I spend a fortune on what's called lumineers. But all my lumineers have been cracking in the last several weeks. And so I actually had to have them completely removed and replaced with veneers this time. And so, unfortunately, that's been a 2.5 week hellish series of dentist appointments that seem to never be ending. And at the last minute, my dentist called me in the afternoon yesterday and told me that I had to come back to his office, which, by the way, I should mention is a 2-hour drive from where I'm at, because he is one of the top-rated cosmetic dentists in the country. And he told me that I have to come in because one of my teeth needs to be shaved down, and I have a night guard, which I'm required to wear because I'm such a stressful sleeper at night and I grind my teeth. And so he told me he didn't want to ruin my new veneers that have been put on a couple days ago, so I have to run down there and get that. So that's why I have to do this early appointment. So I do appreciate you coming in early and doing this for me. And please note that there's always a replay for this for those of you that cannot make it. But normally I'm able to schedule and be here on time as previously agreed, but sometimes things do come up at the last minute. So I do appreciate you being a little flexible in this. Okay, so at the last segment, we started to talk about bird dogging, or becoming a professional finder or property scout. And this is kind of part 2 to that, where we're going to kind of go into more detail about exactly what to expect in this business, how to navigate yourself in the business of being a professional property finder or bird dog, if you will, and how to use this as an opportunity to build your pot, if you will, to being able to make enough money to ultimately be able to sink that money into buy and hold assets or passive income assets. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, is more of the nitty gritty. Last time we talked a little bit about exactly the types of deals that I was looking for as far as my investment group and the investment groups I work on behalf of, as well as the other investors in our network. And this week we're going to talk a little bit more about the minute details as far as how that whole process works, the submission details about how you'll be submitting your deals, and a little bit more about how the whole contract phase works and so forth. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this segment. So I call it building your pot, because I want you to always remember that the end goal of this whole enterprise is to ultimately buy and hold assets for passive income for yourself. This is not just a money-making endeavor where you have to remain on the treadmill for the rest of your life doing deal after deal after deal. That's really a bad way of doing this. And coming into this business, it's a very poorly executed way of getting involved in this business of real estate, is to only flip deals or only do bird dogging for deals with no other end goal in mind, because you're going to find that after a time you're going to get sick of doing this as well, just like anything else in life. And so I want to see you take some of the profits that you make from your flipping or from your bird dog professional finding activities and ultimately put those into buy and hold assets to where you can get that monthly income from small apartment buildings or multifamily or even single family homes. And so that's why I call it building your pot, because bird dogging is a way to build your pot, or build your, I guess you could say, pot of money to ultimately put into buy and hold assets through down payments and so forth. So that's why I'm calling it that for the sake of this presentation. Okay, so a bird dog is a property scout. There's other things to call it, like we mentioned, property finder, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. But it's basically finding deals for other investors, and you get paid in the process of doing that. And there's a couple of different ways in which to get paid doing this. There's the buying and flipping portion, where you essentially buy it, rehab it, and then flip it to somebody on the back end. Typically that's just for the flipping part of it. That's the bigger flipping picture, but there's a different type of flipping that I want to tell you about when it comes to being a professional finder. It's a little bit different of a flipping strategy, where you'd essentially flip your contract instead of going through the whole motions of a traditional flipper. So even though the purchase would be the same, meaning that you would still, just as a flipper would, you'd buy the property under your own name, or ideally under your corporation's name. But instead of going through the rehab process like a typical flipper would do, you would instead flip the contract, if you will. You do like a back-to-back close or an A to B, B to C close. That's one way of doing it, to where you actually have or take possession of or take title of the property, even if it's for only one day. Typically, there's 1 day wet funding or transactional funding that allows you to do a 1 day close without using any of your own money, and it's not a loan, so it's not anything you have to really qualify or apply for because it's based on the property itself. So that's one way of doing it, to where you take actual possession of the property for like 1 day or a few hours before flipping it to what we call a C buyer, or the end buyer in this. That's one way. The other way is to simply flip the contract, where you actually don't purchase the property at all. Essentially, what you end up doing is you actually go under contract with the property with a purchase agreement as if you are going to purchase the property, and then you go ahead and flip that contract or that purchase agreement to another investor before you actually have to take title or legal title to the property. And so this is the best way of doing it. If you're going to be this kind of flipper, where you're kind of a bird dog / flipper, something in between, then I don't really recommend that you actually go to the A to B, B to C close, where you do the 1 day close and take legal possession of the property. I don't really recommend you do it that way, even though you can. I'd rather see you just flip the contract instead, because then you can negate all of the closing costs and the fees that are involved in actually closing on a property by just simply flipping the contract. So essentially, like I said, you would be going under contract with the property as if you're purchasing it yourself. What you always do, though, in those purchase agreements is you put your name or your company name or your LLC, and then you put something called and or assign. So it's the word and, A-N-D, / or, O-R, and then you put assigns. So and or assigns. And the reason you do that is because it allows you to take that contract and assign it to someone else. It doesn't even have to be your other investment group. It doesn't have to be your other LLC. It doesn't have to be an LLC you decide to form later, which is typically why people do that, because they don't know the name of the LLC that they're going to have by the time they close escrow. So they will have an and or assigns on the actual purchase agreement. And if anybody asks, you just say that. Just say, I'm planning on forming an LLC once we're in escrow, and I want to be able to change the name of the company that owns this property, or that's taken title to this property in the interim. Nobody usually asks unless it's a residential real estate agent. Most of the time when you're dealing with commercial property, everybody just automatically does the and or assigns. So it's basically essentially your name or your investment group's name and / or assigns. And then that allows you to essentially flip the contract, where you can actually go to a different investor or someone else and have them buy the contract from you for a higher dollar amount, or just a middle piece of the pie. So say, for example, the property is $500,000 and you're under contract for $500,000, and you got a really good deal on it. And anybody else who's in that market knows that that property is worth, say, $650,000. And so it's a valuable contract then to be able to flip, because then you can go to another investor and say, listen, I just got this property that's worth $650,000 under contract for $500,000. Do you want to buy the contract from me for $50,000? And then you're essentially saving yourself $100,000 because you're only in $550,000 on a $650,000 valued property. So you get a lot of investors that would be interested in that, provided that it is something you got a really good deal on. So that's a demonstration of how to flip a contract in that way. But you have to actually get it under contract and be able to make sure that you have enough time to flip it to someone, because you need to have at least about 30 to 60 days to be able to do all of this. So you don't want it to be short on contingencies and closing dates and so forth, otherwise you're not going to have enough time. And then there's number 2, which is being the middleman in the property, where you basically find deals for specific investors who are interested in deals, and then you get like a finder's fee or a bird dog deal, or bird dog finder's fee or a property scout finder's fee, and then you get paid just by finding the properties, which is probably the easiest way of doing this. So if you're not going to be a full-blown flipper, which is what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of segments, then this is definitely the easiest way to be a property scout or a professional finder, is simply finding deals for other investors and getting a referral fee without you having to deal with contracts, without you having to deal with contingencies and closing costs and A to B, B to C closes and wet funders and all this other stuff. You don't have to deal with any of that whenever you just do it as a cut and dry finder's fee where you're not even touching the property. Now, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell you that flipping obviously is the most profitable, where you buy the property and then you sell it. Ideally, you'll be rehabbing it in the interim. That's the most profitable way of doing this, particularly specific types of properties, which we're going to talk about in the segments to come. So I'm not going to really labor on that this time, but that is the most profitable. However, when you're getting your feet wet in this business, or if you want to kind of get an idea of how this works, or get an idea of what the real estate market looks like in your area, because ideally you're going to be starting off as a professional finder in your local area first, and then kind of expand outward from there. You can get your feet wet doing that, being a professional finder, and then ultimately one day you may or may not decide that you want to flip. But flipping does, I'm going to have to be honest with you, offer the biggest profit opportunity for you, above anything and everything else out there. So later on you can ease into that if you'd like. But what you're going to start off with is being the middleman, meaning you find an investor, you find a property, and then you get paid a finder's fee. Now, the good news about being part of the Flip It Profit system is that you already have found your investors. So the hard part is taken away. And because you're going to be working with our investment group as well as the investment network that I work with. So you don't have to find the investors. The investors are already part of this group that you're working with us. However, I'm going to show you a little bit of an advanced strategy in the event that you want to expand your horizons or you want to find more investors to find deals for. And I'm going to show you how to do that as well, just so that you have that knowledge in your toolkit, because I always try to give people the most knowledge possible to be able to have the maximum amount of potential and potential profitability for their business. So finding a property, we kind of started talking about last time, but we're going to continue on how that whole thing works. In fact, it's going to unfold not only in this segment, but also the segments to follow as well. So even though we're going to be talking about flipping in the next couple of segments, and if you know you're going to be a professional finder, do not skip those next segments, because in those next segments, we're going to really drill down deep on finding property, which is going to apply to anyone and everyone who wants to be part of the Flip It Profit system. Whether you want to be a professional finder or a flipper, it doesn't matter. You all need to know how to find property, which we're going to be discussing in full detail in the next couple of segments. So this is going to be the easiest way to get started in this business, is just simply being a middleman or a finder. Now, warning, there are certain legal issues that are going to be brought up every so often. First of all, sometimes real estate agents will try to get, snotty with you and be like, you can't be a flipper. You can't flip contracts, or you can't be a finder, because then you need a license. You need a real estate license. So you don't want to really share these details with a realtor or real estate agent, because they're going to tell you this because they feel like their job is at peril if you're doing this kind of thing, and they're not. Now, this does vary by state. So you do have to check with the Department of Real Estate in the state that you're going to be doing this. It's because it does pertain to the state in which the property is located. But say, for example, you live in California, and my investors live all over the country. Some of them are outside of the country. And say you're doing deals or looking at deals in Florida because your sister lives there and you go there a lot and you know the area, or maybe you used to live there. Well, how are you going to have a real estate license? Are you supposed to have one in California and Florida, and then also in the state that the investor lives, which might be Texas, or maybe he lives in France, because I have one investor who lives part-time in France. How does this work? And so that's when things start to get diluted and you end up in the gray area. But the loophole for you in most cases is that because you're working on behalf of an investment group or investment company like you are with us, then you're actually an independent contractor for us. It would just be like me having my assistant, for example, go on LoopNet or on homes.com and look for property for me, and then I give her a bonus when she finds stuff for me. That's just exactly how it is. She doesn't have to have a real estate license to do that, especially since all the deals we look for as far as buy and hold assets, they're out of state. They're out of the state of California. So how does that work? Does she get a California real estate license to be able to find deals for me on the internet in, say, Atlanta, Georgia? That's not how it works. So it'd be the same type of perimeter where you're going to be given a finder's fee or a professional fee for properties that you find for our investment group as if you work for us, except you're going to be working as an independent contractor, which would be no different than if you worked in our office as my personal assistant or as one of my staff members who was looking for property for us and then just getting a bonus for finding things. So that's essentially how we get around this over and over again. And at some point when you find your first deal, there will be an agreement in place. There will be a contract in place, which will specify the payment and the 1099 and the work terms. So we're going to have a 1099 form to where it actually solidifies the fact that you actually work for us and with us, which negates the entire need for the license, the real estate license. So again, the reason I'm telling you this is because if you happen to blurt this out to a real estate agent or a realtor, they're going to give you a hard time about this. So I'd recommend that you don't do that, A, and B, understand that you're doing this on our behalf or on behalf of the investment group that we work for. And essentially, you are a 1099 or independent contractor employee for us. And so the 1099, you will be getting that first 1099 upon the first deal that we accept from you. So please don't ask us to immediately give you the 1099 form after your first submission. It has to be accepted by us first, and then we will automatically give you the 1099 form, a little tiny paragraph that basically says the quote-unquote work terms, which is essentially you just finding the deal for us. That's basically all it says. And then it specifies a specific payment based on percentage, but there's going to be an actual physical dollar amount, which I'm going to discuss in just a second. Now, the challenge when you're first starting out, especially when you're finding your own investors, is to get an investor to trust you. So my issues with investors lately is a lot of them are gun shy. A lot of them don't want to pull the trigger on specific types of deals. So I'll tell you which ones that they won't do. Right now, they're not working with new build up from the ground, new construction deals. So if it's a build from the ground up, raw piece of property that needs to be completely built on from the ground up, they're not accepting those right now. In fact, it's really a hard sell in any economy. But as we slide into another recession, it's even more difficult to try to sell them on any kind of new construction. So don't even think about bringing us a new construction deal. It's not going to happen. But there's certain other types of deals too that they don't like. A lot of my investors don't like mobile home parks, because, with the exception of like one that really does them all the time and another guy that does them part-time. He does half and half. But other than that, it's a hard sell for most of my investors. And we, as my investment group, the one that I control, does not do mobile home parks at all. We like brick and mortar, actual physical buildings, not mobile units. Those are not considered brick and mortar, even though they might seem like they look like they kind of are. As far as the banks and lenders go, they're simply not. So just be aware of that. So there's just a lot of different nuances, a lot of different things to navigate with different investors. That's why it's beneficial to work with us directly by submitting deals to us directly, so that you can, basically cut through the crap and get directly to the investors that are going to accept your deals, but also to be able to submit things that people are looking for, that we are looking for. And I went through that in kind of minute detail in the last segment, where we were specifically looking for multifamily, residential, commercial, other types of commercial property, but not so much single family homes, mobile home parks, and like retail storefronts. I mean, nobody's really looking for any of that. So if you're in the business of finding like 2, 3, 4 unit multifamily, small apartment buildings, 5+ unit residential commercial apartment buildings, even office buildings, 2 to 4 stories, as long as it's in a major metropolitan area of 250,000 or above in population size, those are the types of things we are looking for. So please note that as long as it's something we're looking for, it's very easy for me to find investors, or we as an investment group might just jump on your deal depending on where it's located in the country. But otherwise, if you're going to try to, give us a bunch of houses or give us a bunch of, mobile home parks or things that we just don't want, it's going to be very difficult for me to place your deals, in which case you're probably going to have to find your own investors to be able to flip these deals to, or to be able to get bird dog fees from. And if that's the case, you're going to have to build up a relationship. You're going to have to build up a trust with a completely different set of new investors that we have nothing to do with, because we don't have any idea what these people are, who these people are. So you do have to take the time to build a relationship. Sometimes you can get screwed if you're dealing with outside companies or people that you don't know, or people that are outside of our network. I don't work with people that screw my students or screw my professional finders ever. And so you don't have to worry about any of that with us and with the investors I work with. However, if you're working with your own investors, you do definitely have to worry about that. So there are ways to protect yourself. And that is, you don't have to reveal all the details about your deal. And particularly if it's a pocket listing, it's relatively easy to keep it obscure. Now, if it's something you could find online through the MLS, it's going to be very difficult for you to hide it, because it's going to be very easy for them to search up the address or the amount of units. If it's in, say, Atlanta, Georgia, and it's a 100-unit apartment building, well, there's not going to be too many of those there. And it's going to be relatively easy for them to find it if it's on the multiple listing service online. So the alternative to that is to be able to lock it up under contract, meaning that you lock it up under contract and you're the buyer of that, so that even if another buyer comes along, provided that you don't fall out of escrow or have to cancel the contract because you're not following through with it, they have to either buy the contract from you or they just don't get the deal at all. So when working with us, though, please note that we will not accept deals that are already under contract, because we usually negotiate even lower on the price of the property. And if once it's under contract, it's impossible to do that. Upon the acceptance of your submitted deal, we'll create an agreement between you and me, or you and my investment group is more like it. But also, too, if it's with our investors in our network, it would be among our investors and you. We would not have anything to do with a deal at all. And then it would be for a certain dollar amount. So even though usually this is by percentage of the final purchase price of the property, it's going to actually be a dollar amount that's agreed upon, because what typically happens is, even though you found a deal that maybe it's a small apartment building and it's listed for $1 million, $1 million, that might be what you think the end all be all is going to be. But when we go in, we'll likely be able to negotiate it down to either 900 or 950. And so our agreed fee might be 2%, say. So 2% would be $20,000 on that deal of $1 million. Now, if we went in there and renegotiated it to 900,000, that wouldn't be fair for you. If we negotiated, say, okay, well, you said 2%, so therefore now that we negotiated down on the price, you're now not getting the 20,000 that you wanted. Since we negotiated it down to 900,000, you're now only getting 18,000 instead of the 20,000 that you thought you were going to get. And that's just not fair for you. So typically what we do is, instead of putting a contract in, or I'm sorry, a percentage in the contract, we will put an actual hard dollar amount. So then that way, no matter what happens, if we negotiate down on the price, which is, by the way, again, why we do not accept deals that are already under contract, so we do have the negotiation leverage there. But we'll put a specific dollar amount in the contract, so that no matter what we get the deal for, even if we go all the way down to $500,000 for it, you don't end up losing any of your percentage, your initial percentage that you agreed to. So we do this to make it fair for you. It certainly, would be better if we did it by percentage across the board, because it would be better financially for us. But we want to make sure that you make the most in this and that you do this the smart way, to ultimately parlay this into working with other investors, to where you don't get screwed and say, hey, yeah, I'll do this for a certain percentage. They negotiate down on the price and you lose thousands of dollars in one fell swoop because you only have a percentage in your contract. You have to have a hard dollar amount based initially on a contract based initially on a percentage of your deal, but have a hard number, have a hard dollar amount in our contract, and that's the way we set it up. So what happens is the amount will be paid to you at the close of escrow. This can happen one of two ways. It could happen via the escrow instructions, where we have it built into escrow to say, hey, we have to pay this guy or this investment company. Hopefully you're doing business under a company. We talked about that in the last segment. And if so, we'll have the check made out to XYZ company, whatever the name of your company is, or it could be yourself, which you're going to get slammed on capital gains taxes, I could tell you, by doing it this way, because it's coming from an escrow company. And it's going to look like it's the sale of a property. And even though it's not capital gains, it doesn't matter anyway. It's at your tax rate anyway. Whatever your personal tax rate is, that's what your capital gains is going to be anyway. So it's just going to be a flow down directly to you of profits. The cool thing about using a corporation or having a corporation is that you can churn out expenses before you have to pay any money on it. So say, for example, you did make $20,000 on that deal and you were paid a finder's fee of $20,000 and it ended up in your business bank account. Well, all of a sudden you have all these expenses. You have a percentage of your mortgage can actually be a write-off because you have a home office, and a percentage of your utilities at home can be a write-off because you have a home office. And you bought a chair and a desk and a computer. That's all stuff you could write off. You bought some paper for your printer and some toner and some pencils and pens and, a planner and, part of your cell phone bill because you're using the phone for business purposes. You have a Vonage phone line for business. You could write that off. So you write all these things off, and by the time everything comes down to it, that $20,000 turns into, say, $3,000 to $5,000 that you'd ultimately pay personal taxes on. That's a big difference in comparison to being completely responsible by putting your own name on the contract and receiving the money in your name personally. You have to pay the taxes on the whole $20,000. You get paid last when it comes to the federal government. It's just like being a Paycheck Charlie or a Larry Lunch Pail, where you are being paid last. The government takes out their money first, and then you get paid the peanuts thereafter. That's what's called a paycheck. Okay, we're all used to that. We get a paycheck, and we get the money after the government has their hands on it, and after they have their way with our paycheck, then we get the little peanuts that's left over. Rich people don't do it that way. Okay, they do it the opposite. The government gets paid last, and how they do it is through companies, forming companies. They have sometimes hundreds of LLCs and S corporations and C corporations to be able to toggle funds through, and by the time they get a flow down to their personal taxes, there's almost nothing left. There's write-off after write-off after write-off after write-off. They pretty much find validity in writing off everything, including their car payment, including their gas. Now, I strongly recommend you see a CPA before doing this, hopefully a brilliant CPA and not some run-of-the-mill, CPA that barely got his degree in school. But you want to be able to work with somebody who's used to working with people with money, because they could find every possible loophole to where you don't have to pay taxes. Then the government gets paid last. So I strongly, strongly recommend, if you have not formed your S corporation by now, I strongly recommend that you do that immediately, effective immediately. You have to do it immediately, where you want to have an S corporation in your home state, and this is the corporation that's going to be getting all the bird dog fees, and then you basically turn out and churn out all of your expenses, and then at the very end, then you can pay the government. When it's time for you to file taxes on April 15th, you personally pay the government whatever you owe, whatever's left over from the company. And by the way, I should mention that your company taxes are due 1 month earlier than your personal taxes. So your company taxes will be due March 15th. So you file your company taxes by March 15th, and then whatever's left over in profits after you've literally taken every possible write-off you can, then you pay the government on your personal taxes from the K-1 that you get from your S corporation. It's basically your 1099 essentially from your S corporation. It's called a K-1, and that's how you pay your taxes. So please, if you want to be the stupid person and do it the stupid way, then you can come back to me in about a year crying about how much money you had to pay the government by doing it the stupid way and by having your name on all the documents personally and then having to pay all the personal taxes on it. Please don't be the stupid person doing this. I wish I would have known this stuff when I first started out. No one told me any of this stuff. None of it. This is stuff I had to learn. I had to earn my stripes. It took me decades to learn. So when I'm passing this stuff on to you, it's with love, I guess you could say, and with care, great care, that I want to see that you succeed in ways that I was unable to because I simply did not know this information, and nobody in the Big Boys Club tells you this information. So I'm telling this to you after earning my stripes for more than 2 decades in this business, okay? So please listen to me when I tell you, go get yourself a damn S corporation in your home state and call it a day. Don't question it, because I'm going to be saving you a lot of money in taxes down the road, and ultimately that builds your wealth. People get mad at Donald Trump because he didn't pay taxes, and even though everybody knows, anybody who knows me knows that I don't really like to get involved in the political scene, and I don't like to go through political debates because it's just a losing debate. I'm not a fan of either side, Republican or Democratic. I'm just not. I've never been a political person, but I have to say that Donald Trump does what every other rich person does. They pay as little taxes as possible, and that's just the way it is. So you can pick apart any of the big billionaires and multimillionaires, and they're all the same. They don't pay a penny more than what they have to, and they have whole teams of people to make sure they don't have to pay a lot of taxes. That's just how they all do it. So regardless of what you think about that, that's just a reality of how billionaires and multimillionaires work. So rather than you continuing to be a victim as a paycheck Charlie and accepting the peanuts that the government tosses your way after they've had their way with your paycheck, why don't you turn the tables by following the bit of advice I'm giving you and by getting an S corporation in your home state with an EIN, which if you recall is your employer identification number, which is essentially the social security number of your company. And as long as you have those two components, then you can now start rocking it like the big boys do, and you can start paying the government last like they do. And in fact, if there's no money left over, there's nothing to give to the government, and that's how they all play the game. The only way that you're going to get ahead is if you start playing the game like they do, because if you continue trying to play the game the way it's set up, which is a setup for a failure, then you're going to constantly be failing and wondering why. See, the way the system was set up, particularly the school system by Rockefeller back in 1902, it was a setup for failure. They wanted the common man to, number one, become worker bees for their factories and for their, work establishments to continue making them money, while everybody else continued to be a slave for their enterprises. And so that's why the school system was essentially created. It was not to educate people, it was to brainwash people into staying on a certain schedule, to be able to get up Monday through Friday at a certain time, eat lunch at a certain time, all of that crap to brainwash people from a very young age. And then they don't teach you anything as far as economics goes. They don't even teach you how to balance a checkbook. I remember being in high school, and I found out it was the loser kids who essentially were able to get into what was called business math, which I thought was the coolest class ever. I was in algebra and I sucked at math. I still suck at math, and I hated math. And I'm like, how do I get into business math? Because I found out they did all kinds of stuff. They got the balanced checkbooks. They actually got little fake checks that they could write, stuff out of and pretend like they had a checkbook and were writing out bills. And I thought that was the coolest thing. I'm like, how do I get in that class? And they're like, oh, you have to be a loser kid that's flunked out of, regular high school math. And so that's the only way to get in, is to basically be a flunky loser. And that's the only way you can get in the business math class. I'm like, wait a minute. The name of the class is called business math, and you have to be a loser to get into the business math class. It made no sense to me whatsoever. And that was the closest I ever got. Not that I even got close to that class, but closest to ever seeing a class that emulated any kind of skill set we'd ever need in the real world was that business math class in high school, and I've never seen a class since then. So there's no classes for you to understand the real economics and how real money works. There's no classes for you to understand how to balance a checkbook. There's no classes for you to understand how credit works, how credit cards work. You're purposely forced into the world completely blind to all the realities of the finances and the economics of the world on purpose. And then what the elite does is they happen to have the whole system, in the palm of their hands. They basically have college interest rates. You honestly think college loans are going to go away? Because if you honestly think that, think again. That's not part of the elite and what they want, and the elite runs the world, folks. I hate to be the ones to tell you this, but they run everything. So if you honestly think any politician is going to ever go in there and abolish student loans, student debt, being able to pay for college, all that stuff is never, ever going to change. Mark my words. Press record on your cell phone and record everything I'm saying right now, and then replay it 10, 15, 20 years from now, and you will come back to me and say, listen, Monica, you were 100% right. Student loans haven't gone anywhere. Interest rates have gotten even worse. There's still student debt. They're still having to pay for college. College rates, in fact, are even higher than they've ever been. It's because the elite run that system. They run it for the purpose of them getting wealthy and for them to keep you constantly as a slave to the system. You're constantly on the treadmill. So they do this on purpose. And the second thing they do is they make sure that you are constantly distracted, constantly, given bad news, given fear, given the most repulsive, the most destitute news possible. It's all in the way of controlling you and controlling your mind, when most of the stuff that really happens in the world, you'll never know. You'll absolutely have no idea. So it's basically a full-on facade. So one thing I do agree with, which is not a lot, but one thing I do agree with Trump is that when he says there's fake news, he's 100% correct. It's always been that way. It's never been any different in any other time. The media makes you focus on certain things, and it's because the elite runs the media too, and they want you to focus on this. So they're holding up a hand that has like a flag, a red flag in it, while their other hand is doing something completely different on the other side. That is what they're really doing. It's the part that you're not paying attention to because they purposely are waving that red flag in their right hand, and that's what you're looking at, and that's what the news is about. Newspapers, you can't trust any of that anymore. And so please note that the whole system is rigged and it's not in your favor. And so the faster you understand how rich people do this and how rich people get ahead, not paying attention to what they're telling you to do, not paying attention to what they tell you to do in school for sure, but definitely doing the things that they are doing. And one of the biggest things that they do is they have tons of corporations. I was actually shocked at the amount of corporations, the amount of LLCs that they came up with that Trump had. Something like thousands, which I thought was really a lot. I have dozens of companies, dozens of LLCs, dozens of S corporations and C corporations, and I thought I had a lot, but of course that's nothing in comparison to what Donald Trump has with thousands. And they were like kind of being persnickety about it, like, oh look, he's got thousands of LLCs, he must be hiding something. It's like, no, they all have thousands of LLCs, maybe not that many, but they all have a lot of corporations and LLCs because they're protecting their bottom line, they're protecting their wealth, and that's how they do it. So instead of following the news and telling you, ridiculing these people, you need to follow what the people are doing, what the wealthy people are doing if you want to get wealthy yourself. You're never going to get wealthy working more hours. You're never going to get wealthy trying to work overtime at your job. But what will make you wealthy is understanding how OPM or other people's money works. And what will also make you very wealthy is how to use corporations to be able to gain wealth, whether it's building business credit or whether it's paying less in taxes. And ideally, it's both for you if you understand how this whole thing works. And so, like I said, don't do what the news is telling you to do because they're only there for the paycheck Charlie. Pay close attention to the wealthy people, what they do, and you'll understand how this whole system and this whole process works. And by the way, like I said, it took me over 2 decades to figure all this crap out. So I'm just hoping that you're heeding to my advice and doing it, because this education of mine was not cheap, let me tell you. So you'll either get the money through escrow instructions or by a company check at the very end. But again, I'm hoping that check, whatever way it comes, whether it's escrow instructions through the escrow company or if it's through a company check from the investor, I hope that it's going to a corporation and not to your person, because if it's going to you personally, then you're going to really be screwing yourself on taxes. Okay, so you're going to make obviously the most money with flipping, and we're going to be talking about that in the next 2 segments mostly, but I'm just going to be honest with you, the flipping's where the money's at, but you can definitely start with finder's fees or being a professional finder. Now, certain states have flipping issues where flipping is not legal. They want you to hold the property for a minimum of 12 months. So you're probably wondering, well, I see a lot of flipping shows in Texas. How is that even a workable thing? How is that a thing? And the answer is they work with what's called a quitclaim deed, where they'll even hold the deed and they'll just flip the paper without even actually filing the deed with the county. And it's kind of a little bit of a complicated I guess, situation there, which I really don't want to go into huge detail about. But that's essentially what happens is somebody will sign over their property to you in the form of a quitclaim deed, and it actually will not be filed with the county. And what will happen is that person will just then sell the property through the quitclaim deed that they actually have a physical notarized, quitclaim deed in their hand, and they'll sell that to the person who is buying the house, and then it'll go through title and escrow at that point. So it'll look like the property hasn't been sold in a long time. So that's essentially how they do it. So there's a way around pretty much everything. One way of doing this is by doing transactional funding. You can borrow money for a day. This is the A to B, B to C close. I don't like using this because it's harder to make these deals work, but it's definitely something that's doable. So that's why I thought I'd bring it to your attention. By the way, this is when you are actually taking legal possession of the property, even if it's for one day. But you do have to have your end buyer set up and under contract before you're even able to do the A to B, B to C close. This is a little bit harder to be able to pull off. I don't really recommend that you do this because, you know, it's a lot harder to be able to pull it off. What I do recommend that you do is flip property at some point after you're done being a professional finder, or as you're in the realm of real estate and you decide, oh, hey, that deal looks pretty good and I think I want to invest it in it on my own and maybe rehab it myself. Then you could use what we call Gary money. This is something that we use. It's kind of a term in our office. He's a guy that works only exclusively for us, and he works exclusively for my firm. And his name is Gary, and he's located in your Flip It Profit resource directory, so you can find his information there. But we call it Gary money. And the cool thing about Gary money is that it's unsecured cash. It's an unsecured loan. Depending on what your FICO looks like, determines how much you get. But you can get actually a couple of loans, which can add up to be about $450,000 in unsecured cash, with no collateral, no upfront fees, no application fees, no income verification, and no employment verification. And he'll even work with some people, depending on your background, if you have shaky credit. But I do recommend that you really do start fixing your credit. So while you're working as a bird dog or a professional finder, start fixing your personal credit, please. And if you don't know how to do it, then find a law firm or somebody that can help you fix your credit, because you really do need to have good credit eventually to be able to enter into the world of OPM or other people's money. So I do strongly recommend that you start working on your personal credit effective immediately while you're getting your S corporation in your home state and other things. So then that way you have a FICO of over 720, or mid FICO should be, and even better if it's over 750, because that allows you to open doors to be able to do these other things, working with the leverage of OPM or other people's money that you don't quite get when you have a 600 FICO score. So that's the other reason. The other thing that the elite tries to do is the elite tries to keep everyone in debt with car loans and mortgages. I mean, if you've ever looked at an amortization schedule on a mortgage, it's ridiculous. It's like the first 5 or 10 years you're paying on that mortgage, it's mostly going to interest and very little is going to principal. And this is how these people continue making billions and billions of dollars while keeping the lower classes in check. And the only way to break free from that is to start breaking free from the actual system itself. And so even though I have a mortgage on my main house, mostly for asset protection, but also too for the tax write-off, you know, I have to say that amortization is probably the biggest scam as far as the loans go. But when it comes to my car loans and stuff like that, I look for 0% APR, which is very easy to get when you have really good credit and you work with, you know, mostly American made companies. But I start looking for opportunities like that because I understand how the system works now. So why do I want to continue making these people rich while being on the treadmill by constantly working and working and working more and more and more to pay all these interest payments when I shouldn't have to? And this is how they're making all of their money, by not only making them richer, but it's also allowing them to control the population, and by constantly keeping everyone on this treadmill to where you're so busy working your ass off that you don't ever look around to see what opportunities are available, or even look around to see maybe that you want a better life for yourself. They want to keep you busy. They want to keep you distracted with news and social media. That's all part of the scam. So the more you start to disconnect from all of it and to start really understanding how this whole economic thing works, then you too can start becoming very successful and very wealthy if you can start using OPM for the benefit of you starting to become rich. Now, it may not be on the same schedule as the elite, or it's the same level as the elite rather, but who cares? You know, I mean, even if you only make a certain minuscule percentage of that, you'll be doing really well for yourself. So I recommend you use the Gary money for your flip deals. Obviously, you're not going to be using them as a professional finder. So your biggest challenge is finding investors. So there's ways of doing that. Obviously, when you're working for the Flip It Profit investment system, you are working essentially with my investment group as well as the investors that I have in my network. So you don't have to worry about finding investors. But I did tell you that in the event that you ever want to venture out and find your own, then I would tell you how to do that. So there's ways in doing that. We can go online, you can do letter campaigns, or you can go into magazines or even newspapers My most successful way of finding investors is going into newspapers like Investors Business Daily and Wall Street Journal, into the classified sections there. I found that I could find investors for pretty much any type of project in those two publications. You want to first learn their criteria, like what kind of properties are they looking for, price range, are they willing to do 100% cash out, or they're typically going to put a down payment down and leverage it that way. Do they want foreclosures, or they want traditional sales like a straight acquisition, or they want both? As there are certain areas of the country they invest. Every investor that I work with has a specific area to invest, which we'll go into more detail as we go into the next couple of segments. So then once you actually have a potential property, then you want to create a proposal. I call this a mini business plan, which we'll also go into more detail as we go along here. But I want to give you an overview on kind of how this works. And it's not as difficult as you think, especially since you'll be getting a template to do this. So the elements of a proposal is the property description, the area demographics and industry information. So how many people are there? How fast is the population growing? What's the average age and the median income? What industries are in that area that support jobs, etc. Now, if it's a cash flowing property, like an apartment building or an office building or something like that, then you'll need the current property cash flow or numbers. This is what we call the actual numbers in the biz world of commercial real estate. Then you'll want pro forma numbers, which are futuristic numbers, meaning these are the numbers I'm expecting this property to see in the next year, and then in the next 3 years, the next 5 years. If you only want to do one set of pro formas, you can, but if it's an underperforming property, you definitely have to give pro forma numbers of what you expect the property to increase in cash flow in the next 12 months. And then a rehab plan if required. This is literally one paragraph, and it basically says, approximate rehab costs will be X amount of dollars, and if you're not sure, just add about 10 to 15,000 per unit. If you want to be safe, add about 15,000 per unit. So for example, say it's a 10-unit apartment building, and you want to be able to give an assessment on how much the rehab is. So just by using my rule of thumb, 10 times 15,000 per unit is 150,000. That would be the approximate rehab for that building. And so that's essentially how rehab works. And so you just say the approximate rehab will cost about 150,000. It will take approximately 90 days to complete. So that's basically your rehab plan. That's it. It's nothing more than that. It's not even a paragraph. It's like 1 or 2 lines. And then a management plan. And typically the management plan is pretty cut and dry. It's basically once the units are leased up through, if it's an apartment building, it would be a residential real estate agent who can help rent those units. Then a professional management service will come into place to be able to manage the property. And then the exit strategy. This basically means what do you think the buyer should do with the property? And this is really none of your business, but it's just basically kind of a suggestion. Should they buy it and hold on to it for 10 years? Should they buy it and sell it within 3? And if that's the case, how much do you think that they can get for it when they turn it that fast? So that's just kind of a suggestion for them. It's not really, this is what you're going to do. It's, well, if you kept this property for 10 years, by the year 2030, it will be worth approximately, 10 million more than what you pay for it, or whatever, and these are going to be guesstimations, by the way. Nobody's going to hold your feet to the fire on this. No one is. That's not how the business works. So, just don't think that somebody's going to haunt you later because you made a suggestion. You also need to cover ROI, which stands for return on investment. So they want to know, how much are they going to be in the deal total? Like, is this a $1.5 million deal total? Is this a $1 million deal total? How much will the investor make, and how long will it take for he or she to make it? These are all key questions that have to be addressed and covered, ideally within the first couple of paragraphs of your mini business plan, and then again at the very end in the conclusion set of paragraphs there. You can also pinpoint an exit strategy by time frame. Like, for example, it'll be highly recommended to consider maybe selling this property in 10 years from now, because we'll have already gone through our second recession by then, and it'll be peak of the market at that point. So we guesstimate that this property will be worth $10 million, which is $8 million more than when you paid for it, giving you a nice $8 million potential profit. And I always say potential a lot because nobody can ever haunt you later and say that you told them for sure it was going to be that way. So the bottom line would be $8 million, say, in 10 years. And then you can then give them ROI percentage, which you could find a ton of ROI calculators online that would help you be able to get the percentage on this. And then you need to also include, this is part of a sales pitch, why this is the most, awesome, hottest property deal ever. The executive summary is just about a half a page. It's almost like the conclusion. If you're really a long writer, it could be 2 pages, but it's usually about half of 1 page. And it's basically a summary or a conclusion of the entire proposal business plan. This is on the very last page. This is something that their lenders will ask for, so this is why it's essential to do it in a pre-done fashion for them, so that they can essentially just rip it out of the proposal that you give to them, and they can give that to their lenders, to where they don't have to do the work themselves. You also include the ROI by percentage and dollar amount, not just percentage. So your bird dogging success hinges upon your connection with investors, which you already have through my investment group, and finding good deals, which is going to be on you. And so the next couple of segments, we're going to talk about exactly how to do that, because that is the essential part of that. And of course, once you find a good deal, and then to have a really solid proposal, which will also go into detail about that in the next couple of segments as well. So this is the perfect way of getting started in real estate investing, because you can ultimately, like I mentioned before, use these profits to fund your own deals, ideally buy and hold assets like small apartment buildings, even a bunch of single family homes that you cash out 100% without a mortgage. You want to be able to put these funds into your own deals to where you can get buy and hold passive income, monthly cash coming in, and ultimately you can retire from that. It also allows you to get experience in the world of real estate investing and to make valuable contacts in both finance as well as with other investor cohorts that you can ultimately maybe do investing deals with, maybe do partnership deals with. And then most importantly, it allows you to gain confidence, because what makes or breaks whether or not people actually end up doing this whole business of real estate is whether or not they have enough confidence to make the deal, to make the phone call, to sign the contract, to go through with the whole process. It's usually a confidence factor that makes or breaks whether or not somebody's successful in the real estate business. And so this will give you the confidence, because you're not actually investing in these properties right now. Later on you will, but it allows you to gain confidence because you've made phone calls to real estate agents, because you've talked to sellers, because you've even talked to maybe somebody in the asset management department of a bank, because you've started the process of actually learning the lingo. Then it ultimately gives you confidence, and then you can ideally do your own deals at one time in the future, which is the whole point of this whole business. This is certainly not for your health. It's certainly for money, but you don't want to constantly be on the treadmill of looking for another deal and another deal and another deal. And at some point you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, that was a kick-ass deal. I could have had that deal on my own. And then you start looking at the business differently, going, well, how can I make this deal for me instead of for an investor? Look at how much, as you're doing these proposals, you're going to be like, look at how much this guy's going to be making on this deal. I could be doing this deal on my own. Why should I give up this deal for only $18,000 or $20,000 as a finder when I could be making millions on this deal in the next few years if I take the deal on my own? So eventually you'll start to pull the trigger and do the deals on your own by just being a finder. And then unfortunately for us investors who are dependent on you to find good deals for us, you're going to be off the grid and off you go. You're going to become your own investor, and then thus becoming our competition. So even though us investors talk about not wanting to see that, I want everybody to be successful. And that's why I continuously train people in a way that you'll never find training anywhere else, because I do want you to be successful. And I do happen to know that no matter what, there's enough for all of us to go around. There absolutely is. I do believe that. And so I'm never going to hold you back, and I'm never going to dissuade you from following your dream and following your heart to ultimately getting your own passive income assets going so that you can retire just like I can, although I choose not to because it's boring, but that's another subject altogether. But I want you to be financially free, and that's why I continue to do what I do, continue to train students as I have over the last several years, and train you with the best possible nuts and bolts tools that I could possibly give to you so that I can ensure that you are successful, provided that you're willing to follow through with everything I tell you to do. Okay, this is Monica Main signing off, and I'll see you next time.